Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time. Today, we're diving into a really powerful idea from Norman Coombs' book, The Black Experience in America. We're going to unpack how a racial hierarchy got hardwired right into the country's institutional design. Have you ever been in a conversation about race and it feels like you're just jumping from one headline to the next? It can feel totally fragmented, right? We end up focusing on the symptoms, these really painful, isolated incidents of injustice, but we hardly ever get to step back and look at the actual system that connects them all.
And that's exactly where historian Norman Coombs' work is so helpful. He gives us a way to see the entire picture. It's best to think of his book not just as a history, but as an architectural blueprint. It's like he's showing us the nation's original design, and more importantly, how that structure is still standing today.
So here's how we're going to walk through this blueprint together. First, we'll tackle this idea of a crisis in perception. Then we'll get right to the nation's foundation. After that, we'll see how the whole thing was reinforced over time, look at some of the superficial renovations, and finally, pull it all together to understand the full design.
Okay, so first up, what do we even mean by a crisis in perception? Honestly, the core idea is pretty simple. It's about a shift in focus. To really get a handle on the Black experience in America, we have to stop looking at events as if they happen in a vacuum and start seeing the systemic framework that ties everything together.
And making that shift, it leads us straight to the absolute core insight of Coombs' work. He makes this powerful argument that slavery in America wasn't just a byproduct of prejudice, it was the nation's foundational infrastructure.
So, slavery as infrastructure. What does that really mean? Well, Coombs says there were three things that made American slavery a unique kind of system. First, it was all about capitalism. It was designed to systematically generate wealth. Second, it existed right alongside this powerful new idea of individualism, but only for some people. And third, the whole thing was held together by racism, which was the logic used to decide who gets to be an individual and who gets to be capital.
And this quote from Coombs says it all. In America, an enslaved person became a form of capital. Just think about that for a second. This wasn't just about social status. This was an economic system. A human being was literally turned into a financial asset on a balance sheet, a cog in a machine built for profit.
And this is the central metaphor we need to hold on to. This entire system, economic, legal, and cultural, became the nation's foundation. It was poured like wet concrete. And once that concrete set, it became incredibly rigid, incredibly permanent. Everything that came later had to be built right on top of it.
So that brings us to what happened next. Eras like segregation weren't some brand new construction project. No, if you're using Coombs' framework, you see that they were built directly on that same, unchanged foundation. They just reinforced the original design.
And you can see exactly how it worked. Legally, the old slave codes just morphed into Jim Crow laws and separate but equal. Economically, the plantation system just turned into sharecropping, which kept Black families in a cycle of debt. And culturally, the old justifications for slavery were repackaged as the new racism, using bad science and stereotypes to keep the hierarchy in place. They all propped each other up. Okay, so you're probably thinking, what about the huge world-changing moments like emancipation and the civil rights movement? Well, in this architectural metaphor, Coombs views them as renovations. They absolutely changed the building's appearance. They repainted the walls, put in new windows, but they never actually went down into the basement to mess with the foundation. This slide gets to the very heart of it. It's what Coombs means when he talks about emancipation without freedom. Over on the left, you've got these huge formal changes, amazing new laws and rights on paper. But then you look to the right and you see what stayed constant, the deep structures of economic dependency and social hierarchy. The rules on the surface changed, but the foundation stayed the same. All right, let's pull all these architectural pieces together. When we step back and look at the whole blueprint, what does it really show us? Well, it brings us right back to that very first question we asked, that crisis in perception, that feeling that everything is disconnected. That's what happens when we treat racial injustice like a series of random, one-off episodes. The structural view asks us to stop just pointing out the cracks in the walls and to finally go down to the basement and examine the foundation they're built on. And so this whole analysis leaves us with one final, really provocative question. What does it actually mean to renovate a society if its foundation remains unchanged? This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a longer audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.